Sasha, here we are. If you forget where we are, just look at the
How could you forget?
The nice black hat sign anywhere around this building. We're in Las Vegas. Good to see you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. And we've heard about ReversingLabs. We've had a few chats with folks in the past. Excited to have you join us again here and get an update from you. Not everybody's heard of ReversingLabs. We hope to reach more people today with our audience, which has grown over the years. Before we get into the conversation, we're going to talk about some fun stuff, looking at applications and commercial software. You have some opinions on how the supply chain is being treated at the moment, so we're going to talk about that. A few words about your role, maybe your journey into ReversingLabs and what you're doing now for your organization.
Sure, and thanks again for having me on the show. So, my name is Saša Zdjelar. I'm the Chief Trust Officer at ReversingLabs, and I'm also an operating partner at Crosspoint Capital. So my journey is, I've been in the information security space for about 2 decades, a little bit over. I spent most of that time working for a large energy company, and then I transitioned to technology industry after that. And I just kind of took the combined sets of experiences, both on the buyer and seller side, to hopefully come help in the private equity side.
Gotta make that connection work.
That's right.
People want solutions that fit and
That's
invest in those things.
Well, it's very important to understand both sides.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we were talking before we started that the organization, ReversingLabs, the founders had a vision for a solution that has really come to fruition. The need is here now more than ever before. Kind of give me the background story of ReversingLabs and why it was founded and kind of the initial impetus for what it was to do.
Yeah, happy to do that. In fact, I think it's very important and helps set the context for why ReversingLabs has such a differentiated capability. And the co-founders really were incredibly kind of insightful and could, kind of read the tarot cards a little bit.
Right.
So most people don't know that ReversingLabs has been around for, I think now we're in our 16th year. So that's quite a long time.
Right.
And at the time, the co-founders said, look, what is happening currently in the antivirus industry and in the industry looking for bad things in files, it's just not going to scale. The way that those solutions work, they only go 1 or 2 levels deep. There's file size limitations, file type limitations, packer problems. So in other words, the ability to actually look at whether there is something malicious or not was very, very limited. And so they set out to basically build an engine that was a no compromise engine, to say, look, we want to be able to take any file, any size, any complexity, commercial or open source, proprietary packers, and be able to deconstruct every one of those files into every single piece, and for every single component, we want to convict it. Is it good or bad? Is it malicious? So they've been building this engine for 15 plus years, and it's what gives them this incredible capability now.
When you say packer, just to make sure I'm understanding, an encrypted zip file? Is that what you're talking about, or is there other things is it other types of, I don't know, tell me what it is.
Yeah, so it's what makes all that code that you hear developers write, eventually get packaged up into what you get from the vendor, which is just the executable, right? So that's kind of the compiler or packer. And that's what gets you the MSI file or the executable or whatever you usually get from the vendor.
Right, got it. Okay. So this, we're focusing primarily on applications that run within the organization to, manage HR, to manage marketing, give engineers their environment to build in. Tell me a bit about what you've seen progress over time in terms of how companies are building. Maybe it's the build by partner, and when I say partner, maybe that's the open source of building software, buying software. What's that landscape look like these days? Has it transitioned over time?
It has, and I think it's important maybe first to level set that when we say analyze anything, that really could mean anything. It could be files coming in email attachments.
Okay.
It could be files that you share and collaborate with on SharePoint and other platforms. It can be tarballs, it can be containers, it can be golden images, that you run in your environment. It could be just an executable. It could sort of be anything. And whether it's what you produce internally as part of your own software development, maybe for your own internal purposes, or what you produce for commercial purposes if you're a software vendor, or it's just software, like you mentioned, HR and treasury and ERP system software that you buy that runs your company. So popular thing you hear is people say sometimes is, oh, open source, the world runs on open source. yeah, the world might run on open source, but your company doesn't. Your company, for very good reasons, runs on commercial software. You want someone to be able to update it, maintain it, patch it, extend it, enhance it, integrate it with other things, make it compatible with different operating systems. This is the reason why companies run on commercial software. So now the question is, how do you know if what you are buying with that commercial software, how do you know it's not the next SolarWinds? How do you know it doesn't have a software supply chain compromise? And that really what kind of fast forward us to a few years ago when SolarWinds happened and a few other kind of periphery software supply chain incidents. The industry needed a solution that can take any file, any size, any complexity, deconstruct it into its constituent parts, and convict or analyze every single component. So what they'd been building turned out was the exact perfect engine that was needed for this purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in terms of awareness then, speaking with prospects and customers, what have been some of the drivers? I can imagine CMMC coming along. How do organizations realize they need to actually do this work to achieve whatever results that they think they need to achieve?
Yeah, great point. So let's first maybe establish what constitutes software, what components are in it. So a lot of it is sort of first-party code. So some of it is maybe stuff you yourself develop. Let's say you're a software vendor, right? You have developers, and there's code that you write that you develop. Okay, that's one piece. So that's sort of first-party code. Then you could have maybe third-party code, right? It could be contracted code. So you pay some sort of a development shop to build parts of an application for you. So that's code that comes in from somewhere else. Then you might import third-party open source components. That's a part of it. Then you might import third-party proprietary components. That's a part of it. So by the time you get done sort of assembling an application, it is far more than just what your developers wrote. Right? So by the time you get to software, the lineage and where it comes from, and sovereignty of who wrote it and who maintains it could be from all over the planet. Right. So what you started seeing happening after SolarWinds, to your point about CMMC and other things, is, for example, one of the first things was Executive Order 14028 during the Biden administration. Now, that said, look, anyone doing business with the federal government, or anyone who does business with someone who does business with the federal government, has to start providing what is called an SBOM, or a software bill of materials. Right. So think of that as sort of like an ingredient list for a piece of software. Now, why is it important? Why do I say ingredient list? Because an ingredient list is also not a recipe. Right? You just have a raw list. You don't know kind of how it's used. If someone gave me, call it the ingredient list for my car, and it said it has 4,942 of this kind of T6 bolt, and it has these metal components or whatever, while that might be a list of parts, it doesn't tell me as constructed if that vehicle is fast, secure, safe, and all those other things. Similarly with software, it's a great step towards transparency. Right? It's great to know what's in something. But if you ever looked at sort of the ingredients list or the software bill of materials, it's a little bit like when you go to the store and you pick an item off the shelf and you look at the nutritional label. Right? So if the FDA mandates that they have to be listed in order of sort of like what is the biggest component, what constitutes most of it, and then towards smallest. And so usually the ingredients list looks something like wheat, you can read that one, I don't know, soy, you know what that one is. Right. And then by the time you get to like ingredient 3 or 4, now you're into like tetrafluorobenzene floganate. You can't pronounce it. You know how to spell it. And you certainly don't know what it is. Right. Well, that's similar in software bill of materials. They don't contain 4 components. If you ever looked at any, they contain hundreds of components, thousands of components, tens of thousands of components. Right. You might recognize the first few as libraries maybe you've encountered before. By the time you get down the list, you have no clue what that actually is. So the list and just seeing it listed doesn't give you context for whether it's good or bad. So what the government started saying through things like Executive Order 14028 is, we need more. We need more transparency. Then you saw that evolve in other jurisdictions around the world. In Europe, we just saw the publishing of ECRA, the European Cyber Resilience Act, DORA, NIS2, a number of things like that. We just saw, either a week or 2 ago, the federal government came out with even more things around DoD software. Right? DoD software now cannot come from or be under any influence of specifically named China and Russia. Right. Okay, but how would you know if a component of some software has a maintainer that is from China or Russia? Or how do you know, one of the things that it says is code that can't have sort of any influence campaigns run by that country. Okay, if increasingly humans aren't the ones writing code, but it's AI generating the code, right? But let's say the AI that generated it is a model from China, DeepSeek, for example, right? Is a Chinese model that automatically generates code, is that foreign influence on the code? So there's all these questions that now need to be answered around what it means to have full trust in the software that you run.
Right. So clearly, if you're trying to do business with the DoD, you're going to go through a whole slew of things probably to get a FedRAMP or FISMA or whatever it is that they're going to require. If you're not working in that space, what are the drivers to have this visibility beyond? Ultimately, I think I'm a proponent of do the right thing for the business and your customers, but sometimes it's a partner-driven thing or some other regulatory-driven thing. In Europe, the ones you mentioned, NIS2 and DORA and so on. What are some of the drivers you're seeing for people to actually take a step back and say, what's in the stuff that I'm running my business on?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. If you are a software producer, right? So if you're someone whose product is software that you sell to others, well, you really sort of don't want to be the next SolarWinds, right? So some of this is protecting your brand, your business down the road, loss of accounts, loss of reputation, things like that. And you don't want to be in front of a congressional panel explaining why, your CI/CD pipeline or your build process, had a sort of a tampered compromise that allowed some malicious component to get in. So I would say one reason is it's just good business, right? The second one is, in this space, we've really never had a technical control before. We've had a lot of, I'll call it maybe loosely, security theater. In the absence of a control, we've built a lot of control-like things that weren't really a control. So we would send questionnaires to the vendor and say, "Ooh, do you do these things?" Or you would buy cyber insurance, or maybe you'd build some things into contracts. Well, those are all sort of mitigations in the absence of an actual control. But with ReversingLabs, you get an actual technical control. You can take someone else's software that they've sold to you, because what do you get from them? You get Zoom.exe or SAP GUI .exe. Well, you can take that and actually process it now, and we can tell you, does it contain malware? Has it been tampered with? Does it have secrets? Has it used the best compile time hardening practices? Is it beaconing out to some undocumented LLM that's sitting in a region around the world that's maybe undesirable to you? Does it contain vulnerabilities? Number of other things that you could not do before.
Or a backdoor.
Yeah, or a backdoor, absolutely. Yeah.
What? So great list of things that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. What do you do with that information? Do you not use Zoom EXE, or what's the outcome for an organization analyzing? And that's just one example of Zoom, right? They have thousands, tens of thousands of apps. What are organizations doing? How wide and broad are they scanning or assessing? Yeah. And what do they do with that information?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things that it enables or helps. One, you can make risk-based decisions. To your point, will you just not use it? Well, maybe you probably will still use it, especially if you've already bought it and it's already deployed. But you can make some risk-based decisions around which of those findings are okay. You can contact the vendor and let them know about the problems, and obviously work with them on remediation. You can start insisting from them that they just ship it to you with this sort of a trusted seal, or call it a attestation of some sort right from the get-go. There's no reason why you should be finding problems that they should have never shipped it to you with, right? That's some of the things you can do. What you can also do is continuously monitor. So between versions, for example, you can say, look, this piece of software materially changed, right? It had these problems, we understood them, we accepted the risk, or maybe we worked with the vendor to eliminate them. But like SolarWinds, look, between this version, this new behavior was added that doesn't make any sense. Why would it be doing that, right? So there's a number of things that for a CISO, again, these are capabilities you never had. There's nothing, you never had any ability to look at someone else's code. Because think about what we all invested in over the last 15 years in our AppSec programs. I built 2 of them. We bought SAST for static application security testing, DAST for dynamic scanning. We bought software composition analysis tools. What are the limitations of those? All of those do nothing for you when it's someone else's software. You can't run SAST, you don't have access to the code, it's their code. You can't do SCA, it's not open source. You can't do DAST, it's the client binary app that gets deployed on your entire fleet, like Zoom's a good example, or any of your EPP agents, CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1, whoever. Okay, so all of your investments that you've made in AppSec tools are useless in this context. So what do you do? Well, again, in the absence of a control, you would have all of this extra mitigating kind of stuff. Well, now you have a technical control you could deploy for that.
So describe the control, and then, because I'm picturing a bunch of other mitigating controls, like you kind of went like this, surrounding, so you have stuff on the network, you have stuff on the endpoint, you have whatever it is, maybe some monitoring that looks for behavior. Huge expenses to do all that.
Yeah.
So tell me about what Reversing Lab does from a control perspective to maybe, I don't know, make that easier, make that less expensive, or what's going on?
Yeah, so a number of things. One, depending on the size of the company, you could have kind of an overwhelming volume of incoming net new capability requests, net new software that the business is asking for or whatever. How do you decide which of those requires much deeper scrutiny and analysis, pen testing, whatever you would do, very costly human manual driven things, versus which ones don't? This can be more, as a kind of a very basic thing, it can sort of be a pre-filter. You can say, analyze the software. Look, if it looks like it's clean bill of health, no CISA, Kevless, CVEs, no malware, no tampering, no build time security best practices missing, no container hardening missing, boy, that looks like that's a pretty good proxy for that. Probably is a shop that has its sort of act together. Maybe we don't look at this piece of software as closely as we would for something else that lights up sort of like a Christmas tree. There are also operationalization things you can do. You can put it at the front end of your sort of procurement cycle. So we know a number of companies that have implemented it as part of procurement. Anything net new that comes in, drops into sort of like a dirty folder. From that folder, it gets analyzed by Reversing Labs, and it only gets dropped into the company's, proper kind of L4 network or, internal network once it's sort of clean. And any net new version has to go through the same thing. That's one example. Others are scanning their entire SCCM packages before they deploy it, because there's no such thing as a trusted vendor anymore, right? So there's a number of ways you can kind of operationalize this. People are using it, to analyze even any time a file traverses a trust boundary. So like if there are files, I used to work in the energy sector, OT space, ICS, control systems and all that. Usually you do things like, twice a year refinery turnarounds where you sort of pause things, welders go in and they fix welds and, fittings and things like that. And at the same time, when they're doing that, people go in to upgrade software and, PLCs and things like that. So you kind of have this batching twice per year. Well, anything that then goes in, firmware, new software for the controllers, for SCADA systems, all of that is crossing a trust boundary. It's going into this much more potentially hazardous environment, right? Don't you want to know that everything going into that environment is clean?
Right.
So that's another way to operationalize it for example, critical infrastructure sector. Right. Or if you're a financial sector and you have things like settlement files, or what do you call them, MFT, file transfer services.
Right.
The entire financial sector runs on the concept of settlement files, these kind of flat files that get ingested into systems. Regulators really care that that's good, and if something goes wrong, they make you shut down the system. That costs real money. In some cases, we've heard in numbers of like $7 to $30 million every time they have to stop this to just go on a fishing expedition to confirm that it's good. So imagine having a control in the front end of that to know that only good things go into these systems. There's a number of ways to operationalize it.
Interesting, and some of those weren't CISO roles. Procurement is not a CISO role.
Right.
So who and how do you converse within the organization to kind of help them navigate what's important to them? Does it change by sector? Does it change by geography? Who are you speaking to, and who's really taking the reins for certain types of activities? Yeah,
look, I would say predominantly it is still the CISO in the security organization, right? The capabilities of the company are still things like malware analysis, threat hunting, threat intel, analysis of software. That is still very much a key CISO function. Now, are there things that can be done on the periphery? For example, if we have a company that is carving every file that's going east-west or north-south and putting it into a giant data lake, right? That is then being analyzed by Reversing Labs. Okay, now that might be maybe a blend of like network folks, traditional infrastructure and IT and security. In the ones where it's people moving left or moving as early in the process as possible and making it a part of procurement, now the procurement department's involved. For those who are using it to analyze third-party software, so COTS, commercial off-the-shelf software, that might be in some companies a third-party risk, TPRM, third-party risk management team. For companies who are software vendors who want to make sure they're not shipping the next SolarWinds, right, or the next malware embedded in their software to their customers, that is often on like the product engineering or product security teams. Sometimes those report somehow through the CISO. Most of the time they don't. They're sort of product security is sort of its own entity, more closely tied to the business and in the engineering org than to the security org. So yeah, there's lots of different use cases and sort of target personas.
Is this, I'd imagine it has, but become a board level conversation?
Right after SolarWinds, it became one, and then we track it very closely. It continues to still kind of, it's somewhere in the top 5. Some years it goes up to top 3. I think 1 or 2 years it was even in some broad surveys, even number 1, software supply chain security. Maybe that was the years when we had the big spikes in the CircleCI, Kaseya, like a lot of those happen at the same time. But I don't think it's been out of the top 5 in the last 7-8 years, and it seems to be kind of climbing up. So absolutely a top level board concern. More and more Section 16 officers or real directors of the company have increasingly direct accountability and responsibility for the outcome of the security program. So they're starting to ask more of the questions. As we see the attacks like just a few weeks ago when at first it was sort of an open source piece of software or component that had the malware in it. Then they found out that, but that's the open source that's part of commercial packages. In that case, I think it was some Microsoft products. So now that this concept of a trusted vendor is gone. There is no vendor you can really trust anymore. And increasingly boards are starting to ask, what are we doing about that?
Right. So you help them answer that question with varying levels of trust, I suppose.
That's right.
It's not a binary. As we wrap here, speak to the CISO. There's a lot of CISOs listen to the show. What, if they're not doing something about this now, what can they use as a trigger or lever to take the first steps? Because they're probably going to have to, unless it's a Skunk Works project, they're going to have to probably go to the ELT, executive leadership team, to get some budget to do something, even just to analyze their current state.
Yeah.
What are some triggers or tips for them to take that first step?
So I think there's a few different things, and I just want to mention that one of the other things besides the regulation and the board concern that's happening is the analyst firms are starting to talk more about this. I was just at an event here at Black Hat that was kind of a software supply chain summit, and one of the things that one of the analyst firms talked about is that in the last 6 to 12 months, because this concern keeps coming up around commercial software and the traditional tooling and solutions can't solve it, that they're seeing the emergence of this sort of complex binary analysis space to take a black box, which is just an executable, and be able to tell you something about it, insightful about it. So you also have, my point being, you also have now more and more, the analyst firms are giving you kind of the artifacts, to arm you to go have those conversations. So it's not just small niche players saying it. You have the big analyst firms also saying it. Right. So what I would tell a CISO is, look, you're probably already being asked for years, what are we doing for software supply chain security? I think what it also allows you to do is to go in and say yes, and your mind might drift to open source when you hear that. But just remember that what this company runs on are all of the commercial applications that we buy from all of our kind of critical suppliers and vendors. Yeah. I can now deliver to you a technical control to give you far, far higher assurance that we will not introduce a SolarWinds or malware to take down this environment. You might be able to influence your cyber insurance rates, for example. Those might come down. You might be able to replace some of your other controls that are less effective. You might be able to save, in some cases, companies that have an existing large investment in things like sandboxing solutions, for example, which have the same limitations as the antivirus problems, file size, file complexity. They're able to either substantially reduce the size of that sandboxing deployment infrastructure by letting ReversingLabs pre-filter everything, like analyze everything, and if somehow we're not sure, you can still send it to the sandbox if you want. Most companies find when they run in that mode for a period of time, they don't actually need the sandbox anymore at all. This is better, faster, cheaper. So you can offset the cost of this in a number of ways, plus gain an actual technical control that you've not had up until now.
Super cool. I want to have you make one more point, because before we started recording, you made the point to me that there's a lot of, you didn't say chatter, I'm going to say there's a lot of chatter around SBOMs and a lot of focus on the open source piece.
Yeah.
So make the point from your early days being in the energy space, the scenario that you described where you think we might be over-rotated on open source.
Yeah, I think it's, it's no one, I don't think anyone's doing it maliciously, right? But when we talk about software bill of material and software supply chain as a space or as a concern, I think our minds tend to drift towards open source, because you hear of like the Log4j, and you hear of, those make kind of the, the newsletters and the podcast circuits and things like that. But what is maybe lost in that is all of that open source componentry eventually makes it into a commercial package that you're buying from someone, whether it's your unified communication and collaboration tool, or your ERP system, or your treasury management tool. And more software development is really more like software assembly, right? It's construction from pieces, it's like Lego blocks. Less and less code is actually written, and a lot of it is reusing pieces. So, while we are, I'll say, maybe lightly distracted by only considering open source, the actual breaches that we're seeing are happening in, SolarWinds, 3CX, CircleCI, Kaseya, Ivanti, Okta, Microsoft. All of these vendors, well, guess what they all have in common? Those are all commercial packages. Those are all commercial tools. So it's now time for us to have a control to be able to look at that.
And you pointed to NotPetya.
Yeah, I mean,
as an old example.
Exactly. I mean, I think people think this kind of started with SolarWinds, but if you rewind back to what happened with WannaCry and NotPetya, that was a piece of Ukrainian tax software called Medoc, right? It was supposed to be targeted, kind of got out a little bit. Well, guess what Medoc was? Commercial software. So this stuff has been around since, I guess, 2017, call it. I mean, even before then, right? We have lots of examples of Shamoon and Dooku, and like a lot of the ones that were really original, but where it hit corporations big time, I think the first sort of flare that we should have looked at closer was WannaCry and NotPetya, and then a few years later we had SolarWinds.
And the Reversing Lab team did that.
Yeah, that's right.
They looked at that flare, took the signal. Saša, great chat. We could probably talk for hours on this. And not get as deep as we probably need to, but hopefully the CISOs listening, watching, security leaders and business leaders listening, got a few nuggets. And clearly, I think the next step is to connect with you and the Reversing Labs team, so they can look a little bit more into what you're offering and how you can help them kind of get control over this.
Yeah,
and
if there's
find ways to mitigate.
And any question we can help answer, we're happy to do that. They can contact me directly or reach out to us, and we're happy to just show them what's already in their environment. Let's just start there. And I'll leave them with actually a really, really good, useful nugget resource in case they're interested. Completely free. There's no paywalls, there's no login walls, there's nothing. We give it away to the industry because we think it's sort of like table stakes for our technology. If they go to secure.software, what they will find is every open source package out there. So NPM, PyPy, Maven, Ruby, all of them out there. Every component, every version of every component, analysis of the open source for free. They can go out and get reports of, is this component bad or not, and we give it away for free. Secure.software.
And you just need the list,
that's it.
Which you can then provide.
That's right.
Awesome. Saša, thanks a million.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks everybody listening, watching. Connect with Saša and the Reversing Labs team, and stay tuned for everything else we have coming from Black Hat here in Las Vegas. ITSMagazine.com/BHUSA 25. See you on the next one.